For centuries, a dangerous idea could be contained simply because it was difficult to copy. A criticism of the church, a political argument, or a forbidden text might exist, but reaching thousands of readers required thousands of acts of reproduction by hand. Then, in the 15th century, that limitation began to disappear. A written page could now be reproduced again and again without someone rewriting every word, as part of a system capable of doing the same across entire books. The consequences would reach far beyond books. Once ideas could multiply, controlling who encountered them would become much harder. But before that could happen, Europe had to escape a problem that had limited written knowledge for centuries. Every copy depended upon human hands. Producing a book was slow and demanding. Pages had to be prepared, cut, folded, and assembled. A scribe then copied the text one line at a time, sometimes working for months on a single volume. The finished book could be magnificent, decorated with color and gold. But creating another copy meant beginning the process again. Every page, every sentence, every word. For centuries, this had placed books beyond the reach of most Europeans. The largest collections belonged to monasteries, churches, universities, courts, and wealthy households. There was no single authority controlling every written work. Scarcity did much of the controlling by itself. If only a few copies of a text existed, only a few people could read it, teach it, translate it, or decide whether it should be copied again. By the later Middle Ages, however, Europe was changing. Cities were growing. Universities attracted thousands of students. Merchants required contracts and accounts. Administrators needed written records, and an expanding number of readers wanted religious, practical, and literary works. Professional scribes, stationers, and booksellers appeared to meet this demand. But they remained trapped by the same limitation. Every new copy still required skilled hands and considerable time. Europe wanted more books than its existing system could produce. Hand copying created another problem. A scribe could misunderstand a sentence, miss a line, or introduce an error that later copyists repeated. Two manuscripts of the same work might not say exactly the same thing. A text could cross centuries, but it could change along the way. Knowledge survived through human hands and therefore remained limited by human hands. Printing itself was not unknown. East Asia had used woodblock printing for centuries, while movable type had been developed in China and Korea. Europeans already carved images and short texts into wooden blocks, but reproducing a long book efficiently still remained difficult. What Europe lacked was not the idea of printing, but a practical system capable of producing page after page, copy after copy. Around 1440, in the German city of Mainz, Johannes Gutenberg began constructing that system. He combined existing technologies in a way that would break the connection between writing a text and reproducing it. For centuries, an idea could travel only as quickly as someone could copy it. Gutenberg was about to make it move at the speed of a machine. Johannes Gutenberg was born in Mainz around the end of the 14th century into a prosperous family connected to metalworking and the city's mint. Much of his life remains uncertain. No document records the moment when he conceived his method, and he left no personal account explaining how it developed. By the 1430s, however, he was involved in secretive technical ventures requiring specialized equipment and considerable investment. The printing press did not emerge in a sudden flash of inspiration. It was built through years of experimentation. At the center of Gutenberg's method was movable metal type. Instead of carving an entire page into a wooden block, a printer assembled it from individual letters. The letters formed words, lines, and complete pages. After the page had been printed, they could be separated and used again. A text was no longer one object that had to be copied from beginning to end. It could be dismantled and rebuilt from thousands of reusable parts. Making this work was far more difficult than the basic idea suggests. Thousands of pieces of type had to be cast with consistent shapes and dimensions. The ink had to adhere to metal without running across the page. The press had to apply firm and even pressure so that every line remained readable. If the letters varied, the ink failed, or the pressure was uneven, the entire process broke down. Gutenberg's achievement was not simply imagining movable type, it was making it reliable enough to produce a complete book. Reliability, however, required money. Metal, paper, ink, equipment, premises, and skilled workers all had to be paid for before the workshop could produce anything profitable. Gutenberg received substantial financing from the Mainz businessman Johannes Gutenberg. With that support, he expanded his operation and began one of the most ambitious projects imaginable, printing a large Latin Bible. But the partnership eventually collapsed. In 1455, Fust sued Gutenberg for repayment of his loans and apparently gained control of part of the printing equipment. One of history's most influential technologies was shaped not only by invention but also by debt, secrecy, and commercial conflict. The book now known as the Gutenberg Bible demonstrated what the system could achieve. Produced during the 1450s, it was designed to resemble the manuscript books familiar to contemporary readers. Its type imitated the dense handwriting used by scribes, while decoration and color were often added by hand. Gutenberg was using a revolutionary process to produce something that still looked traditional. The method changed before the appearance of the book did. Approximately 180 copies may have been produced. By modern standards, that was a small number, but producing the same enormous work by hand would have required many scribes repeating the same labor for years. Gutenberg's workshop could arrange a page once and then print it many times before reusing the letters. Printing did not remove skilled labor, it changed where that labor was required. Once a page had been prepared, every additional impression extended the reach of the original work. Books did not suddenly become cheap, and most Europeans did not immediately become readers. Manuscripts continued to be produced, while early printed volumes remained valuable objects. But the old limit had been broken. A text could now be reproduced without someone copying every word again. Gutenberg had created the method, but he could not determine what others would do with it. Once the machinery and skills left his workshop, printing would become much harder to contain. The decisive transformation began when printing stopped belonging to Gutenberg. Printers trained in Mainz carried the method into other cities, especially after political conflict disrupted Mainz in 1462. Presses appeared across the Holy Roman Empire, Italy, France, the Low Countries, Spain, and England. Venice became one of Europe's greatest printing centers, connecting workshops with merchants and trade routes stretching across the continent. By 1500, presses were operating in more than 200 European towns and had produced millions of books. What had begun as a secretive experiment was becoming an international industry. No ruler had planned this expansion, and no central institution directed it. Printers moved where they could find investment, protection, materials, and customers. Merchants transported books alongside other goods, while scholars and students created demand across political borders. Gutenberg had required years of experimentation to construct his method. Once others understood it, the system could be copied. A machine created to reproduce texts had begun reproducing itself. The first printers did not set out to overthrow Europe's established order. They produced works that existing institutions already wanted: Bibles, theological commentaries, legal texts, grammars, classical literature, calendars, and devotional books. Churches and universities became important customers. The Catholic Church itself used printing to circulate doctrine, prayers, and indulgence certificates. The press could strengthen established authority as easily as it could challenge it. Its danger came from the fact that no one side possessed it alone. As the trade expanded, printers searched for new audiences. They produced practical guides, romances, poetry, histories, medical works, almanacs, songs, and illustrated publications. Not everything coming from a press was a large and expensive book. Pamphlets and broadsheets could be produced quickly, sold cheaply, and carried from one town to another. Printed material also reached beyond those who could read it themselves. A pamphlet purchased by one person might be read aloud in a workshop, an inn, or a public square. One copy could reach an entire gathering. Printers also published more works in the languages people spoke. Latin remained central to religion and scholarship, but works in German, Italian, French, English, Spanish, and other languages could reach readers without advanced education. At the same time, scholars used printed editions to compare ancient works, identify errors, and debate competing interpretations across Europe. Printing did not guarantee that a text was accurate. It allowed the same text and arguments about that text to reach far more people. The consequences became unmistakable in 1517. In the German town of Wittenberg, the theologian Martin Luther challenged the sale of indulgences and questioned the authority behind them. His 95 theses were composed in Latin for academic debate. In an earlier age, the dispute might have remained among theologians. Instead, printed copies and translations carried it far beyond Wittenberg. Printers recognized public interest and reproduced Luther's arguments through commercial networks that neither he nor his opponents fully controlled. A local controversy became a European confrontation. Luther understood how to write for this new environment. He produced sermons, pamphlets, open letters, and theological arguments aimed at audiences beyond the university. His language was direct, forceful, and memorable. Short publications could be printed more quickly than large books, allowing each new accusation or response to follow the previous one with unprecedented speed. Luther's opponents answered through the same medium. Doctrine, argument, insult, and propaganda multiplied together. The printing press did not create the Reformation by itself. Religious grievances, political rivalries, institutional weaknesses, and demands for reform had existed long before 1517, but the press changed how quickly the conflict spread, how many people could encounter it, and how difficult it became to silence. Luther no longer depended entirely upon universities or church authorities to transmit his ideas. Printers had discovered that religious controversy could also be commercially valuable. Luther's German translation of the New Testament, published in 1522, carried the transformation further. Vernacular translations had existed before him, but printing allowed one translation to enter thousands of communities in a consistent form. Readers and listeners could encounter Scripture beyond the exclusive mediation of Latin-trained clergy. This did not mean that everyone could suddenly read or interpret the Bible independently. Books still cost money, literacy remained uneven, and Protestant movements created authorities of their own. Nevertheless, the relationship between institution, text, and believer had changed. Authorities attempted to stop Luther's writings. They were condemned, prohibited, and publicly burned. In 1521, the Edict of Worms declared Luther an outlaw and ordered that his works be seized. But suppression now faced a problem it had rarely encountered on this scale. A manuscript might circulate through a small number of copies. A printed work could already exist in hundreds or thousands, scattered across numerous territories. The Holy Roman Empire was politically fragmented, allowing a book prohibited in one territory to be printed or protected in another. Printers could conceal their names, disguise where a work had been produced, or simply print another edition. Authorities could still arrest writers, search workshops, confiscate books, and punish printers. Printing had not made ideas invulnerable, but it had changed the race between circulation and suppression. By the time one edition was discovered and destroyed, copies might already have crossed borders and reached another press. The same system that distributed scripture and classical learning could distribute polemics, accusations, rumors, and rebellion. Gutenberg had made texts reproducible. Europe was now discovering that reproduction made ideas much harder to stop. Europe's rulers and religious authorities did not simply surrender. If printing could no longer be contained within one workshop or city, they would attempt to control who operated presses, which works appeared, and where books could be sold. Printers could be required to obtain licenses, manuscripts could be examined before publication, and unauthorized works could be confiscated or destroyed. In many cities, only approved individuals were permitted to operate presses. Authorities were no longer deciding whether printing should exist. They were fighting to determine what it would be allowed to multiply. The Catholic Church developed one of the most extensive systems of control. In 1559, it issued the first Roman index of prohibited books, identifying works Catholics were forbidden to read. Later editions included Protestant writings as well as works considered heretical, immoral, or dangerous to religious authority. The index demonstrated that the Church still possessed enormous power. A prohibited book could place its printer, seller, and reader at risk. But every title added to the index also revealed the scale of the problem. The forbidden work had already been written, printed, and circulated. Secular rulers developed similar methods. Governments granted selected printers exclusive privileges, limited the number of presses, inspected workshops, and searched shipments for prohibited material. Printers could lose their livelihoods, their freedom, or even their lives if they defied the authorities regulating them. Censorship remained powerful, but Europe's political geography repeatedly weakened it. A book forbidden in one kingdom might be printed in another and carried back across the border. Authors could remain anonymous. Printers could use false names or locations. Books could be concealed among ordinary goods. Suppression in one territory could create opportunity in another. Printers themselves became part of this struggle. They were not automatically defenders of intellectual freedom. Many cooperated with governments, avoided dangerous subjects, or printed only what appeared safe and profitable. Others accepted the risk because controversy created demand. A banned book could become more desirable precisely because someone had attempted to destroy it. Printers now had to weigh obedience against belief, danger against profit. The gatekeepers of written culture had multiplied, and they no longer answered to the same authority. More printing did not mean that reliable knowledge always defeated falsehood. The press reproduced rumor and propaganda as efficiently as scripture and scholarship. Religious polemics portrayed opponents as enemies of God. Political pamphlets spread accusations, conspiracy, and fear. Arguments could be corrected publicly, but false claims could also reach thousands before any correction followed. Europe had gained access to more information without gaining an automatic way to decide what should be believed. Gutenberg did not invent freedom of thought, mass literacy, the Reformation, or modern science. His press could strengthen authority as readily as it challenged it, and it could preserve falsehood as easily as truth. What changed was how quickly and how far an idea could move. A text could be reproduced, carried across borders, recovered after prohibition, and encountered by people far removed from its author. Power could still punish the writer, close the workshop, and burn the book. What it could no longer guarantee was that every copy would disappear. Printing did not determine which ideas were true, just, or worthy of survival. It gave ideas a life beyond the moment and the people who created them. That was the deeper revolution. A question raised in one city could become an argument across Europe. A voice silenced in one generation could still speak to the next. Books no longer merely preserved what humanity had thought. They allowed thought to multiply through history. Gutenberg did not change what human beings were capable of thinking. He changed the scale on which their ideas could shape the future.